Hello people, so welcome back to finally another episode of Warships CS. It's been a while, so I do apologize for my absence, but unfortunately real life happens and I gotta deal with what I gotta deal with. But nonetheless, it's good to have you back, and it's good for me to be back. So today's episode actually deals with destroyers and destroyer gameplay, so to speak, and technically it's actually the first of its kind on my channel, as I've never had another destroyer game on display before. So you might wonder, why am I doing this? Why am I putting this up? Or why did I even decide to play destroyers? I will say that traditionally and habitually, I have more than anything been a battleship player. Currently I have 4 tier 10 battleships and even more tier 9s. As far as cruisers concerned, I have 2 tier 8s. One which is the Cleveland I got after the tier swap, and also the Edinburgh. Carriers before the revamp, I had 2 tier 7s, the Hero and Ranger, and now I only have tier 6s. And due to all the controversy regarding the CV class, I essentially don't play them anymore for various reasons. But going back to our original idea, why destroyers? Why did I get into them? Why am I at least trying to play them? Albeit at low tiers and mid tiers. I think ultimately this is a game, and regardless of whether or not a new experience might bring you joy or suffering, and whether or not such a new experience will be suitable for a player on an emotional level, I think at the end of the day, it's still a good thing for any player to at least give everything a try, and to see what the game has to offer, and to also have a rudimentary understanding of how some of the ships you will see on the battlefield plays. At the very least, you can at least learn to adopt, and you can learn to know what some of the enemies you'll be facing are capable of, in their own shoes, so to speak. So, what is the Mutsuki Tier 5 Japanese destroyer? I will say that this ship, it's probably, in terms of size and in terms of camo, one of the smallest ship and the least visible ship you can get in the game. Not counting, ships that are configured specially, or things that are not common, that are not tech tree ships, that are not easily obtainable, so to speak. And you can say that, the Mutsuki is actually a exemplary torque boat. It's it kind of very much relies on its torpedo armament to do damage rather than its guns or anything else. Arguably, no other ship in the game have as much of a extreme bias in that regard as this ship. Because for tier 5, this ship has 2 triple launchers for a total of 6 torpedoes. The torpedoes are fairly fast, have excellent alpha strike, and have decent range at 8 kilometers. And for such a small ship, which can be set up for camo, you might not be detected on the surface until the enemy is well within 6 kilometer view. So you have, a decent ability to stealth torp the enemies. So the enemies have no means of knowing that you're there, and you can just maneuver and get to work. And they don't know you're there until it's too late for them, so to speak. And of course, if they turn and they maneuver, maybe they'll, counter you to an extent, but it doesn't always save them that way. The gun armament on the Mutsuki, it's actually usable, but it's not gonna save you in a fair fight. It's not gonna get you out of trouble if the enemy's meaningfully strong, so to speak. It has 2 120mm guns that in practice or in real life is probably manually trained, Their alpha isn't great. Their ballistic isn't great. Their range isn't great. The DPS per gun, it's so-so. Also not great. They reload once every 5 seconds, but there's only 2 of them. So you can't really shoot your way out of anything. Arguably, you can even get into a gunfight against a tier 1, and if you don't use your torps, they can probably outshoot you with their guns. But then, I think it's also important to know that the guns are there, and sometimes they're pretty useful. Such as the situation we see now. Really low health enemy, about to turn around, about to bring their guns to bear. I land one hit and he blows up. In that kind of situation, it's better to use your gun to finish them than to hide or evade or try to use your torps. Because in certain situations, the flexibility is still there, the option is still there. Anyways, I think from the perspective of a battleship player, it's actually not a bad thing for you to learn how to play destroyers and how destroyers behave and what they do and why they do what they do. You gotta know how to lead with your torps. You gotta know how to area denial enemies, such as what I did at the choke point on the east side of the map. And as I'm doing right now against the enemy Kaiser, I believe. So, as a battleship player, you kind of know how enemy battleship players will think. But at the same time, you get to work in destroyer players' shoes. So, you figure out what to do, so to speak. And obviously, one new mistake that, many of the new destroyer players have learned to get rid of is not to be overtly reliant on essentially the lead indicators for the torpedoes. Because ultimately, the enemies are always, changing their trajectory. They're always speeding up or slowing down, unless they're stupid. They might turn to avoid you. They might turn to, as a preemptive measure against anybody like you, or they might have to turn because of other reasons, such as they might be being shot at by your friendly units, such as cruisers, battleships, or even other destroyers. And I think for a mid-tier or low-tier type of situation, most battleships don't really have that much speed to begin with. So even though they know that by sailing in a straight line, they become vulnerable to torpedoes. Sometimes, for other reasons, they might have to try to relocate rapidly, and so they have no choice but to gamble and try to get moving ASAP, which actually makes them vulnerable. And you also know that it's usually common sense that every time the enemy turns, they're gonna slow down. And because these mid-tier or low-tier enemies don't have a lot of speed to begin with, they usually by default sail at their flank speed. So that when they have to maneuver for any reason, they will slow down. So it's a pretty good habit to, decrease the lead for your second set of torpedoes. Because usually when they have to slow down, when your first set of leads don't work, they fall behind. And just time your torpedoes accordingly and they'll get hit. Speaking of which, right now I'm trying to engage enemy Tier 5 Russian battleship Peter the Great. And obviously right here I kind of made a new mistake of assuming the enemy is trying to sail in a straight line consistently and try to engage my team's rear. And of course I take the same opportunity to cap B while firing off those torpedoes. But as you can see, the enemy battleship is being engaged by a bunch of my friendly allies. And obviously, once again, if he was sailing at flank speed already, he couldn't engage, or at least meaningfully engage in evasive maneuver by speeding up. So he can only turn or slow down, which either way, he's going to slow down and fall behind. So those two set of torpedoes not going to hit anybody because I gave him too much lead, assuming the enemy wasn't going to slow down. And one thing you will notice is that I think as a battleship player who has played plenty of battleships, it's been a habit for me, or even for many of my peers, to try to eagerly engage enemies in brawls and try to proactively tank the enemy's damage and force them to fight on your own terms. That's good if you are playing something like the Baron or Colorado or Grocer Kurfürst, something that has a lot of armor that can soak up damage and survive. But when you are sailing something like this, you barely have 10,000 HP of health, you have as much armor as a Coke can. Anybody who shoots you, even if they shoot AP and those do not detonate, they overpan, still, 10 battleship overpan, you blow up. That's not a lot. Even if their salvos have missed and so on and so forth, you can be dead within 2 salvos. So your mobility and your stealth is ultimately your friend. And I think in the battleship world, stealth and mobility are not as appreciated as they could be. Sure, maybe you'll play some of the French battleship with the speed boost, or the British battleship with pretty good concealment. You might figure those things out a little bit, but once again, if you're a classic battleship player who's used to the likes of Nagatos and Yamatos and American battleships, then maybe that's not really a priority, because your attitude will be, I'm going to be firing and engaging the enemy anyways, and the firing kind of make me perma-spotted, regardless of the circumstances. And of course, in this day and age, the whole aircraft carrier situation kind of puts everybody in a bad spot, because there's too many planes and they can loiter, they can, make multiple bombing runs, they can just generally hang around in the area. So that means even if they're not doing damage, even if the enemy is bad, even if the enemy is a bot, a carrier provides essentially omnipresent surveillance. So ultimately, I think the game is you have to go through this thought process to better survive and better thrive on the battlefield. And now, as you can see, the enemy's Peter the Great, another Peter the Great, is actually AFK or a bot who's essentially camping on their cap. And I believe this might actually be a bot, because even though the enemy is not going anywhere, their turret did move and did fire briefly, albeit inconsistently. Probably not a good bot. And unfortunately, the Mutsuki's dual triple torpedo launchers forces you to fire the torpedoes with such a threat. You couldn't make them tighter. This is not a British destroyer that allows you to single fire the torpedoes. So even though I fired a 2 spread of 6 torpedoes, they're good torpedoes. They're those oxygen-fueled Japanese long lenses. That hits pretty hard, 16,000 HP alpha strike. The enemy only managed to take 1 hit and simply flooded. But in the time being, he was surviving and he was actually spotting me. I could have got out of spotting range and try to fire torpedoes again, but then that's gonna put my torpedo launchers on a cooldown. So I realized the enemy didn't really have that much health anyways. So ended up letting him on fire and finishing him off with my 2 tiny guns, which ironically couldn't do much if they didn't hit the enemy's superstructure, because the Peter the Great actually has a lot of secondary armor that will resist smaller caliber HE shells, so to speak. I think 2 other key factors we should mention about this battle are the fact that there's actually no enemy aircraft carrier. So in this case, my stealth really become usable, and I made a count. When there's no plane to spot me, I can better dictate my position regarding the enemy's ships, because ultimately this is a small ship, this is a light ship. The ship has good camo and it's fairly fast. It does 34-35 knots, without breaking a sweat. And I do have speed boost, and you can go faster, probably up to 37-38 knots. So enemy cruisers and enemy battleships cannot forces me to a fight if I choose to disengage. Another thing that really worked in my favor is the fact that so far to this point, I have not yet intentionally engaged an enemy destroyer. Sure, I mean, one of the enemy destroyers earlier in the game ended up eating one of my torpedoes and blew up. But those torpedoes were fired into that choke point where multiple other enemy ships were also present. So that was, both for the sake of area denial and also targeted attack against the enemy's heavier units. But I guess, the enemies happened to be kind of deployed in a horde and bunched up. And so their torpedo took one of my long lenses and blew up. When you have 10,000 health and your oxygen fueled 610mm super heavy torpedo can just break your ship in two in real life, And of course, rushing up to the enemy and engaging them with your torpedo in a brawling match is not really advisable for a Japanese destroyer, because in those situations, if the enemies have functioning guns, if they're shooting HE, you really don't have that much durability to speak of. But then, as consistently I have done in this game, multiple times against the Kaiser, against the enemy Kirov, as well as against the Peters the Greats, even I have managed to engage enemies without stealth, but while they were distracted. I think this is another crucial thing about destroyer playing is that, even though your Japanese destroyer doesn't have the best guns and the best reload and the best turret turn time, you are far more agile than a battleship and arguably many cruisers. So that means when they are turned a certain way, when they're sailing a certain direction, when they are busy engaging and aiming and trying to get a good lead on your allies, especially if your allies are from a different direction and away from you, you can effectively get yourself into a fairly advantageous flanking position, in which the enemies cannot quickly bring their weapons to bear and engage you. So right now I'm essentially stuck in a duel against enemy's Fujin, which is also a tier 5 Japanese destroyer, but a premium, just set to be OP. And he obviously does have more stealth than I do, so he spotted me and he decided to engage me. But looks like I happen to be a better shot. And so I got him more than he got me. And there he goes. I think, ultimately, the two guns on the Mutsuki are very much usable because they have a better reload and decent turn speed, versus, some of the equal tier 4-gun Japanese destroyers, which tends to have, twice as long of a reload time as the Mutsuki, and having 4 guns means, it's much harder for them to get all 4 guns on target. So, having a quicker reload despite a fewer number of guns allow you to adjust your lead, adjust your aim. So even if the enemies are slowing down and speeding up, you can fire twice as often. So your hit probability is probably higher because of that. And obviously having 2 launchers of 2x3 torpedoes versus 3 launchers of 3x2 torpedoes means there's less, single fire style flexibility to the Mutsuki. But, in exchange, you have fast torpedoes, you have long range torpedoes, and you have torpedoes that hit extremely hard and tends to cause devastating flooding. So, despite the fact that I am a battleship main and, arguably a devotee who has, invested heavily in battleships, mid-tier destroyer is really a lot of fun. Not to mention, you don't really get to see tier A CVs or any of the high-tier CVs that's, essentially causing a lot of controversy in the game right now. And, arguably from my perspective, they're not exactly pleasant to play against. So at the end of the day, made a lot of profit, almost 200k worth of profit, 7 kills, multiple medals. I say that's probably not terrible for a obvious DD noob, so to speak. Anyway, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe and whatnot. I'll obviously see you another time. It's good to have you.